Got it.
All right, I'm gonna let him in. Do you want me to do the intro or?
Yeah, could you start and then that would be great.
Yep, we just lost one person.
Oh,
Here he is.
Oh,
Okay.
there they're back.
like, oh no.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Catherine. Thank you for joining today. It's a small group, so it might just be you two, which means you get to ask all of the questions that you want. Hi. So we might get a few more folks that join, but personalized attention is all yours. I'm going to turn it over to Lumen Impact Group, who is the group that helps us administer the CSP grant and helps us do all the monitoring and works with subgrantees. And they are going to talk about what you need to put together for the budget and answer any budget questions you might have. So I'm going to turn it over to Angie Beeland and Kelly Cadman with Lumen Impact Group.
Went backwards. Hi, my name is Kelly Cadman, and I am a senior partner here at Lumen Impact Group, and I'll be working with you on not only your CSP budget, but some other things if you're awarded the grant. So very pleased to meet you, and I'm looking forward to working with you.
Thank you, same here.
Hi, I'm Angie. I also work with Lumen. And I will be your, along with Kelly and the rest of the team, maybe we'll call it a creative thought partner of getting to yes. I work a lot with, just my experience has been working with federal grants and sort of figuring out that area between what we're allowed to do and how we help to empower your vision. So happy to meet you both. You three now, we have three.
Nice to meet you.
So we are super glad to be able to talk to you a little bit about how to build your budget today. We're going to cover just a few important topics. One of the things we're going to talk about is what value add means. So we want to make sure that this budget aligns with your academic model and that you're able to leverage things to really do some great things to support the growth plan that you have. We will also talk a little bit about allowable expenditures, things that are not, as well as some maybes and when to know to start asking some questions. We'll talk about some interesting opportunities that people may not have thought about that you could actually invest in. And then probably the most important part of this is a Q&A time so that you can ask some specific questions. And Angie truly has many, many years of experience with federal grants and how to get to yes, if she can. And so she'll be taking over that Q&A part to make sure that she can answer those questions for you. So without further ado, let's get started. So to start with first about a value add budget. So as you start thinking about developing a value add budget, it's really helpful to kind of understand what the intent of the grant is. We do want to grow charter schools and we want to grow quality charter schools. And of course, we all define quality as moving the needle for student achievement. And in the past, ramp up for moving that needle has been more of a 3 to 5 year thing. And so this grant is intended to accelerate that. We want to make sure that as you're growing, that you set up systems and programs and processes and instructional planning that is really going to move kids' growth faster. So when you think of value add, that's kind of what the root of that. The grant is intended to provide you with the resources you need to build your capacity so that you can plan effectively. Things that would be difficult to do with a cash flow if you're investing in large things, and then just establishing sustainable processes and systems down the road. So that is kind of where we'll start with value add discussion. So there are a number of things when we think about defining what a value add means. as we are considering your budgets. So the first thing is that these should be expenditures that directly support the goals of the school, right? So every school we work with is very different. You all have unique academic models. Your staffing structures are different. Your school cultures are very different. And so it's our goal to help you balance two primary things. The first thing, obviously, is that you have to be compliant with federal guidelines, right? Okay, that's a given. But you also, we also want to help you with your strategic thinking. You know, how can we leverage this grant to support the growth that you're trying to achieve? We're not trying to draw a box around you, right? There are lots of ways to, I hate the term skin a cat. That's a terrible term, but you understand what I mean. There's lots of ways to get to where you're wanting to go. And we want to help you think strategically about that. It's a lot of money, and there are a lot of opportunities to do that. So we want to focus on innovation and helping you to think about things innovatively that also fit within the guidelines. So there are a few things you can ask yourself that kind of help you connect to your goals. You know, how will your investment in a particular area help you fulfill a gap? How it help you fulfill a long-term goal? For example, let's say that state funding model only gives you a 20-to-1 ratio for funding, but you're like, well, you know, my school model really would do better with 15. So this grant might help you accomplish that mission. Something to consider is long-term sustainability. So you got to be able to do it after the grant is over, but it gets you starting to think about some ways that you could accomplish some big, hairy goals, right? You should also consider how you prioritize your investments. So for example, let's say you want to do one-to-one technology. What we would want to see with that is how does this expenditure really connect to your academic programming and your grant priorities? And finally, you'd want to measure if your investment is really a good return. And when we look at good return, we're like, how is this actually moving the needle on student achievement, right? So, as you're considering what to put into your budget, don't just consider the inputs, but consider what are the outputs of this investment going to actually be, and how am I going to measure that that investment did what it was supposed to do? So that is definitely a consideration. Secondly, let's talk a bit about expenditures that will accelerate student success, right? So the grant is intended to accelerate things, but not just for this particular cohort of kids. We're talking about creating a long-term program that helps lots and lots of kids. You're growing into a bigger school, and we want to make sure that that you think innovatively and that you also have the right capacity and systems and programming in place to do that. So you can start asking yourself some questions. What would you do differently? And how would you answer if I only had, I could really do, this would really make a difference. So the thing we want to release you on is this, that a lot of people believe that this grant has to be, going into this grant, it has to be just exactly, I have to know exactly how much dollars I'm going to spend on every single penny. And we know at this stage of the game, it's very speculative, and that you're not going to know every minute detail. You don't know the students that you're going to grow with yet. You don't necessarily even know the staff and their professional development needs. So this, your budget, this is a preliminary budget. As I said, we know it's speculative, and so we just want to get an idea of what your priorities are, kind of the buckets you're setting to the side, your general assumptions, and just know that if you get funded for the grant, that down the road you're going to have plenty of time to get a very specific budget that will help to get to approval. Okay. That's something that we want to let you know. So often innovation is stymied by startup or ramp up costs and capacity. So this is really your chance to fill those gaps and build an innovative model. Something that I didn't mention that I probably need to mention here is this budget that you're creating is not scored in your application. So we're going to look at it. It's important because it helps us understand your priorities and get a bigger picture of your plan. It can support a better defined narrative. So it is helpful, but it doesn't receive a score. The scoring goes on your operational budget. So that's the one that's actually scored. So I'm hoping that that releases you from a little bit of anxiety as you're developing this budget out. All right, let's go to expenditures that empower and equip teachers to be amazing. I love this slide. Coming from the classroom for many years, this would be just such a wonderful thing as an educator to know that this grant can do. So we typically think about grant dollars and spend a lot of money on things like furniture and technology, and those are all allowable and they're all very, very important. But we don't want you to solely be tied to just those things. We want you to think bigger. You know, how can you truly make the classroom experience for the students more engaging? How can you equip these teachers to be more relevant, more rigorous, more engaging for students, so they're excited about learning, and that will accelerate their growth? So really think not only of those, you know, hardcore things we all think of in outfitting new classrooms, but also the soft things that really make the experience for the students meaningful and the instruction relevant and better for them to continue to grow. Thinking about, you know, how can you use the opportunity in a way? Wouldn't it be awesome to say, hey, teachers, you know, we've got a little supply budget here set aside for you so that you can use to make your classroom more personalized for your students. How could that be used as a retention tool? How could it be used as a recruitment tool? Something for professional development, like what would you reserve to support your teachers? Maybe on the current instructional model that you're using, or curriculum that you're using, or maybe you're growing into a new curriculum with a new grade level. You know, what training would you need? But bigger than that, how can you expand the definition of PD to include things like mentoring and coaching and those sorts of things? So think broadly as well. You know, we don't need nitty gritty right now. We're really looking for a big picture of your ideas and the focus areas that are going to help you grow into this plan. So we'll move on now to expenditures that create a foundation for future success. We need you to look ahead, right? So you have so many opportunities for this grant, but you also need to think about sustaining the growth that you're creating down the road. So we'd like for you to think about, as you're deciding what to invest in what capacity do I need that I could pay for right now and in the next 3 years that are going to build me up for future. So I'll have exactly what I need to sustain a truly high quality program. And so that's very important. Maybe you'll consider things like a certain consultant that would come in to set culture for you that is going to help you if you're growing from an elementary to, say, a middle school. Or maybe you're going to have a whole new set of students coming in and you're like, I know these students are going to be struggling and I'm going to need some extra support to get them where they need so they can handle our rigorous curriculum. Those are the kinds of thinking that you can use this grant for, that could really make a difference in your long-term sustainability of your plan. Let's talk just a little bit now about allowable expenditures. Before I go on, though, I want to stop and ask if you have any big picture questions about anything that I just covered.
Kelly, just letting you know that you added a lot of folks during your explanation. So you have about 12 people on the call.
Hi, 12 people. So just those who are not here, this is recorded and we'll also provide you with an FAQ. So don't worry if you miss something, you'll be able to hear this again. Any questions, any big picture questions? All right, this is the part you probably really wanted to get into. So I just want to reiterate that as we begin talking about allowable expenses, that we don't want to be prescriptive here. A lot of folks want us to provide this is definitely covered, this is definitely not covered. And we stray away from that. We're going to give you a little bit of that today. But what you need to know is there are a lot of things that are maybes. there may be allowable. It will depend on timing. It will depend on circumstance. And so we want you to understand that we want to provide you with some guardrails and some things to think about as you're building your budget. And we want to remind you that we are a partner with you in this and want to help guide you to do the things that you need to do to grow, leveraging this grant, or maybe helping you think creatively through your general fund on things that could be applied to the grant so that you can do the things that you need to do. Okay, so that's the first caveat before we move on. There are definitely going to be some times that things were just not allowable, right? But more often than not, we can work something out to support you. Okay, so before we get into the the specifics, there are always 3 things that you got to think of, no matter what. So the first thing is it reasonable and is it customary? Okay, well, what exactly does that mean? There's some questions you can ask yourself. In a similar circumstance, doesn't it not exceed in either nature or amount what would naturally be occurring? Now that's kind of tough, because let's say, for example, the typical average salary for a teacher is $50,000. I mean, that would be what, that's the average. That's what most people would consider reasonable and customary in certain markets, correct? Well, let's say you are in this situation where there's a high need area, or maybe you need a teacher with a specific grouping of skill sets, and you're not going to be able to recruit and train a teacher for $50,000 on average. So maybe you're going to be offering $75,000, and that seems kind of out of the norm. What you would want to be able to do is to justify it such that in a similar circumstance, anybody else looking for this would also have a challenging time. And therefore that would be reasonable and customary in this given circumstance. Please don't hold me to the 50,000. It was just a very generalized example, but I just wanted you to understand that reasonable and customary really depends on the circumstance, just like anything else, right? So here's another typical situation that you can think of. Let's say that you are growing and you want to add some buses, right? And so let's say you're adding 100 students and you want to write in your budget 5 buses. That would maybe not be reasonable and customary, because you're only adding 100 students. Each bus holds only about 50 kids. And so it would be a little bit harder to justify that in that particular case. So as you're thinking about it, that's kind of the thinking behind it. Just remember that it needs to achieve your overall grant goals and kind of align with necessary operations, and that you're, of course, using sound business practices, arm's length bargaining, and you are compliant with other federal and grant conditions. A second consideration is that the grant is intended to supplement and not supplant, which basically means if you're getting dollars from something else, you can't use this grant again. So if you are getting paid for a teacher position, you really can't use this grant for that same purpose. And so you need to run that through your head, which it really is most relevant going from planning to implementation. There are lots and lots and lots of things that are allowable during the planning stage that are not allowable in the implementation stage, simply because of supplement and supplant. So that is something to consider. And the one we see most often is that what you are applying in your budget and your expenditures are within the scope and timing of the grant. So what exactly do I mean by that? So here are a couple of examples. So let's say that you are growing to the 8th grade. You're going let's say you're going 6th through 8th grade. And the scope of the grant is only for, or let's say you're growing 5th through 8th grade. That's a better example. And the scope of the grant only covers 5th, 6th, and 7th grade. You couldn't buy furniture for, say, an 8th grade classroom, because that's outside of the scope of the grant and the timing of the grant. So that's one example. Something else that we typically see is sorry, I'm letting other people in. Something else that we typically see are a lot of folks say, hey, I'm buying furniture for my new middle school that I'm growing into. Let me go ahead and, apply this and get all new desks for, and you can't do that. Like the grant is intended for the students that you're growing into. Now, there are circumstances where your full building could certainly benefit. So let's say an art classroom, right? You could justify, if you're adding a new specials class because of the growth of these students, the fact that you're going to need this new art classroom. And it's fine for other students to use that, but the primary intent really needs to be for the growth of those. Another thing to think about is like professional development. So if you think strategically about this, you might be training your brand new teachers that or staff that are affiliated with the growth, and that's great. But when you negotiate your contract, you might, instead of wanting to do a per head count expense in your contract with the professional development provider, you might just want to do a flat rate, and that way everybody can enjoy it. So you're sort of reaping the benefits of the grant, not only for the individuals that you intended it for, but everybody else can grow from it as well. Do those examples make good sense? So that's really important as you're thinking about what to include in your budget. So there are some other general guidelines for allowability. So there are a few possibilities. There are a very few nevers. These are never covered. And there are a few always. They're always covered. Now, I use the caveat with appropriate documentation. So if you're approved for the grant and you have something approved in your budget and you decide you want reimbursement, we are going to ask you to provide us with a PO or an invoice. We're going to ask you to demonstrate evidence that it has been paid for and that you have received it. So that's the kind of documentation that we'll need. And of course, it has to be justified, that it goes with all those other things that's reasonable and customary and all of those other things we just discussed. The bigger category is there are lots and lots of ways to spend this money that are sometimes. That will depend on circumstance and timing that would make it allowable or not. And that's how we hope to be your thought partner as you're thinking through this. Also, as part of this in allowability is timing. So there are certain things that are allowable during the planning phase, which the planning phase is a lot more flexible than implementation. Implementation, some things are covered only in implementation, and then you have other things that are that can be claimed in either one. So we wanted to bring that to your attention. And just keep in mind that this grant can go up to 42 months, up to 18 months of planning and 24 months of implementation. And that is largely driven by when your expansion begins. Anything to add to that? All right, we'll move on. So we get lots and lots of things for budget approvals and expenditures. And, we don't like a hard and fast list. And this list even still is not always hard and fast. So well, we do want to provide you a general list of some commonly requested things that are not typically allowable, or they're only allowable under very, very specific circumstances. And so we'll just kind of go through a few of these. So field trips and extracurricular programming, any kind of athletic team, after school equipment, that stuff is it's not, there's nothing we can do about those. They're never that I'm aware of. Angie, can you think of a reason? I can't think of a reason those are ever allowable. Apparel, student uniforms, athletics, land or building,
marketing materials.
Yes. Yeah. Anything
Promotional
like that.
stuff, yeah.
Yeah. Any kind of apparel like that, not approvable. Capital improvements and construction. Excuse me. Somebody's monitoring the chat. I'm going to keep going.
Yeah, I got the chat. Don't worry.
Okay. Thank you. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything that this might need. Capital improvement and construction. This is an area that is typically not covered, but there are circumstances. Some general rules of thumb with it is that you can't purchase land or buildings You really can't add permanent structural things that change the value of the building at all. Things need to be portable on the whole. Construction of a new existing facility. So if you're using large equipment, if you're moving walls, that would be considered construction. Any kind of activities for the actual construction part that are use an architect or an engineer, that's a good heads up that it might be an issue. And technology with electrical that actually impacts structural elements is typically not. I keep saying the word typically because again, it sometimes depends on circumstance, but those are typically no's. Supplies, cleaning supplies, cafeteria and food, including food, beverages, or alcohol. Maybe the exception we talked about might be COVID stuff, would be a consideration, but typically not supplies. Fundraising, anything associated with fundraising, typically not allowable. Incentive types of things, gifts, awards, definitely no alcohol, and that sort of thing. We have lots and lots of people wanting to buy swag with this money. The trinkets, the thing with the school names, the giveaways that for recruitment, that kind of thing is clothing. Those sorts of things are not allowable under the grant. And promotional fees, professional fees like legal retainers and litigation, not covered. I really want to draw out recurring operational expenses. This is a biggie. It's something that we get a lot. Typically, again, not allowable. You can definitely cover a lot of things during the planning period, but anything that becomes part of your normal operations, you should be able to sustain those. And so, and oftentimes it would be supplanting because you'll be getting state funds for those things as well. So that is something to consider. There may be a ramp up period that you could make a case for some of these things, but again, that would definitely be an exception rather than the rule. I would like to draw out that you can claim an audit for 1 year, but then after that, it's considered operational funds. And the same thing goes with back office, that the setup is perfectly fine, but anything after that would be considered operational and would not be allowable. And the final thing in this, I would say that we often get requests for funding leadership positions during implementation, and this is also typically not allowed. So I was going to say a general takeaway on this slide is, if there is something under one of these categories that you really, really want to consider to be part of your budget, call us. Let us talk through your circumstance. Let us listen to the context and let us see if there's something we can do. And if we can't think of a way to make it through CSP, maybe we can kind of help you look at your operational budget and think of another solution that would get you to the same end. We really want to be your thought partner and support you to strategically expend these funds. So, all right, moving on. So we also like to think about some things that are kind of surprising because there are several things that are kind of surprising that are allowable. So as I kind of mentioned, sometimes student-teacher ratio, you can really do a lot with this grant for supporting growing into that model if you want to lower class sizes. Obtaining extra people to set the culture, or maybe a consultant, as I mentioned. So using these funds to ramp up personnel is absolutely a great way to use that. You may or may not want to use these positions. Sometimes you have positions when you're starting either a brand new school or expanding as you are. You might need positions for a period of time, and you're like, I'm really not going to keep these, but I need them for a period of time. That's one thing you can do. But you can also sometimes fund these positions if you can sustain them later. So maybe you're ramping up to them. So those are conversations we can have. We can definitely have with you about that. Timing for schools is very different. It just depends on where you are. Sometimes your planning period can go beyond your initial start date. So I gave the example here. Maybe your planning period was April 1st and it went to October the 31st, but you opened the new grades and started instructing in September. So this is actually a beautiful thing because it lets you use some of your planning funds during your actual implementation period. So things that like personnel or some of your recurring costs that typically wouldn't be covered could be covered. And kind of the way that works is that you provide evidence that replenished some of the upfront costs that weren't covered in the grant. And so that's kind of how that works. There are lots and lots of possibilities that we can help you think through. But, once you get down the road a piece, so again, just take advantage of any office hours to let us help you support you with those things. So let's talk about some opportunities for investment. So we're just going to take some thinking time here. And we're going to brainstorm a bit. So I want you to just think about, based on what you've heard so far, what caught your attention? As you're starting to think about challenges such as teacher recruitment or retention, how can you support planning, personnel capacity building? How do your current fund allocations sort of intertwine with the grant narrative, right? How can you imagine new capacity in planning? And if you build a wish list, what would it include? So I'm going to give you just about 2 or 3 minutes of think time on this. And then that will give you an opportunity to add anything to the chat, because we're going to be moving into the Q&A section next. So I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes.
The one question we had in the chat, Kelly, was about the look back period.
Okay, not what the specific question is.
The question is,
do you see it? Angie,
yep, let me read it.
I can take it.
Okay.
So the question was, can you back charge planning, or more specifically, if you didn't get the grant until January, but you had expenses before that, can you reimburse general fund from the grant? And so the answer is that we will have a look back period to November 1st. It does get a little tricky in terms of what expenditures, because technically as of November 1st, it's feasible that you might have started one of those first grades. If you're going to do a 5th, 6th, 7th, maybe 5th grade, you've already started, which would be allowable. So if you this year are serving a grade that is part of your expansion grade, then that grade would be eligible and you could go back to November 1st.
And what about for planning?
So planning is the same. Still expenditures would go back to November 1st. But that would then your planning period though would go November 1st through October 31st of the following year.
Thanks.
Does anybody need more time to process and think about their questions? Any specific questions? Because we were just about to move into the Q&A time. So there aren't, I can't see the whole chat. I apologize with me presenting. Are there any other questions, or is that the only one that was listed?
That was the only one right now.
Yeah, I was just going to say real quick, feel free to, I think Effie hopped in and then Matt, and feel free to unmute yourself and ask the questions you have.
Yep.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Kelly, Angie, Olivia, for this opportunity. We are, long-term charter school. We're just applied for expansion, and then we'll see what the state is going to tell us. And I'm the BA, and then when I listened to you, I thought for a second, I may not be the right person to listen what you're telling me, because a lot of things is the giving us the opportunity to academically support the program, in that nature, not in necessarily in budget and which ones at all is not at all, because general fund is funding most of the programs, right? So the thing I understood from you guys is that we have to be innovative and come up with something new that's going to be sustainable. And that's something that I cannot answer in my position. But what I can tell you is that we are a science and tech school. We do have the 4 campuses. If we wanted to come up with a brand new curriculum for science and tech curriculum, let's say we're gonna build with a makerspace, with all the devices, the equipment. Is this something we can put on the budget narrative, or the program application, that we can, build up a state of art, the makerspace with the curriculum, with the teachers for the next 2 years for, let's say, 3 campuses, or 2 campuses, or maybe just high school. Is this something that you're looking for, like that type of program?
So I think I'll take that one. Great question. Thank you. And I want to address that in 2 parts. So the one part is we want to be clear. So it seems like a lot of innovation. And as you said, it was, we don't want you to add on to your vision. And I know sometimes that's how innovation comes across, like, hey, do something different than what you've been so successful doing. So really, when we say be creative in that value add, it is more about, sometimes you might plan for your vision not coming to fruition for 3 years. But maybe this is a way, which is going to get to your question, that you could make your vision come to fruition in a year. So when we think about creativity and that acceleration point, we don't look for you to go do something you've never done to use this. We do want to fund your actual vision, what has worked, but we want to help you accelerate that so that you can do it right from the start. So then that gets to your second good question of sort of the limitations there. It gets a little bit, if you were coming in and you were a brand new school and you were saying, hey, our vision is we're going to have this makerspace, we need science labs, we need equipment, we need all of these pieces. That's an easy yes. However, being a school that already exists, we actually cannot cover things that are already in existence for your current students. So if, for example, though, you were adding a new section of 8th grade. So let's say you are serving 100 8th graders and next year you're going to serve 150 8th graders. In that case, you could absolutely add additional curriculum and different pieces for those 50 students, but we would not be able to approve curriculum for all 150 students. Does that make sense? Yes.
We're adding 2 more sections, 2 more, if we are approved, we're going to extend 48 kids, like a 2 section. That means from 6th grade to 7th grade, that means we're going to end up hiring at least 2 classroom teachers additional, and then maybe a few or maybe 1 special teachers. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, so that's
going to happen.
That's another great clarification. So if you're maybe science is not an example, but let's say you need another classroom because you're hiring new teachers, right? So you have greater rotations and you need more classrooms. Those classrooms are all eligible for the build out of that classroom. So your equipment, your teacher's desk, your computers, whatever you need in that classroom are all eligible as well for all new classrooms that you're adding for that capacity.
Angie, I feel like we spent a lot of time talking about what isn't eligible. Can you spend a little bit of time talking about what is eligible, the types of things that you're seeing the first round of grantees spend large portions of their funds on? I think these new teacher salaries are a great example. Those are eligible. New section, new teacher salaries pertaining to your growth are eligible under this grant. So what other types of big things are eligible?
Before you begin, I have another question, but we can combine together.
Sounds good.
So, given the current circumstances that we have the teacher shortage nationwide, and then especially the charters are competing with the local districts, we have a hard time to retain even our existing teachers because everyone is looking for a teacher, and the traditional public schools are paying more salaries, more benefits than charter schools on an average basis. So is that in a way we can actually put a little bit leverage using these funds, and then or especially the position like a hard to fill, STEM positions. Can we use these funds to pay up a little bit more towards the teacher salaries and benefits? That's my second question.
Yes. I'm thinking, but yes, the only caveat to that would be in how you create it to a way it's sustainable. So what we wouldn't want is, hey, we bring on these teachers for 3 years and we pay them $10,000 more because we have this grant, but 3 years later, they're going to take that pay cut. So what, to even Olivia's point, what we've seen other schools do is certainly, I mean, you can put merit pay situations in there. You could put different stipend opportunities that kind of give them some more money in there of different leadership roles that they take, and not new to add on. But what we see is we know teachers come in and they're working on curriculum, they're working on all these different things that are just part of the teaching job, but we don't pay them for. So creating stipends for those extra positions that are not teaching in the classroom. And that's a great way that you're not necessarily having to sustain it, but you could use this grant to increase their overall pay. So any of those things, when you think about what are they doing? Could be data coordination, could be testing coordination, could be, all those pieces. Those are all eligible for extra stipends and extra, as you're saying, or extra salary, however you want to do that. And that's a little safer way of not having the sustainable something that we really are cutting salaries because it's above and a beyond type thing. So that is a great way to use these. Thanks for that idea. The other things that we're seeing a lot of, so we understand with New Jersey, you all have been used to sometimes not putting your salaries into your federal funds because of the way that your funding model works. You lose a portion of some of that reimbursement back from New Jersey. So normally we would be like staffing, because that is great. And we still want you to use that extra staffing. But we have gotten creative with some of the others. And a lot of it is absolutely the curriculum pieces and the PD. And so really looking to say, so to your point, how do you enhance that teacher's experience, giving teachers PD budgets, right? To the point to say, hey, we're going to hire you in, or bringing on a coach or a mentor, like really looking at those pieces that say, why are teachers leaving and what could we bring on that becomes an extra value add in our compensation? And those roles can come in as contracted services. Because you're not hiring a full-time person, you might just be hiring contracted services. Other things schools are using this for are supplies. So when you think about, as we said, you're in one particular, and most of you're expanding sections potentially. Think about the things that all your kids could use. So some things we can only buy. If you're buying new computers that are a 1-to-1, then we can only buy 50 new computers for your 50 new kids. However, if you have 50 new kids and you need testing computers, but yet you all share them, then buy new computers for those 50 new kids. So there's ways that you can kind of fill your budget with that too. So equipment has been a really big piece that folks have used this for, especially with COVID and coming back and wanting a higher ratio of technology to students from that perspective. We've had a lot of folks use it on different interventions and enrichment subscriptions. So things that were above and beyond their original curriculum. Things like library books. Just purchasing all those reading materials, because that's something that all of your students can benefit from. That's another big piece. There's also, as we work through your planning, I will tell you that a lot of this is well, even in planning, we talked about lease facilities and planning are allowable. So as you take on a new lease or your lease increases potentially for the extra space you might need, or if you took on a different building in that planning period, you can cover your lease expenditures. And so that adds up really fast too. You can cover any of your salaries, even though but at that point, you're probably not collecting. So think about your salaries in the way, whatever would be outside of eligibility for reimbursement if you didn't want to put them here. What other things are we seeing? There are in planning, there are definitely some facility things, as Kelly was talking about, that you can put in here if you've got planning time. If you just go straight to implementation, the facility piece comes out. One of the biggest expenditures, back to your original question of the maker spaces and those pieces, is we have been able to be creative with folks to say, okay, well, you have a science lab, but you're adding 50 people. So of those 50 people, we could justify, say 5 more workspaces. And so we have, while we can't do an entire portion or an entire redesign, we have been able to really use the ratios of the new schools and justify some pretty significant expenditures. So we've got some schools that are spending $30 to $50 to $80,000 just in some of those new equipment and supplies and setups and all of that.
I see. Thank you.
There's more, but I want to make sure we get questions, because that always goes to more ideas as well. Anybody else have any things they're wondering about? No. What we would always say, as you're looking at your budget, as Kelly said so well, don't get so hung up when you're submitting this on, is it right? We will help you. We would rather see your vision and what you're trying to do and where you see your holes. And then the first part, if you were to be awarded, the first meeting is going to be what we call a funds release meeting. And in that meeting, we're going to go line by line through your budget. And we're going to talk more about your vision and what you were trying to do. And it's not just going to be a blanket, no, 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 yes, no. We will actually have a collaborative conversation to say, I see what you have here. Talk a little bit more about that. How do you see that benefiting this? How will students benefit from this? So just know that piece is coming too. And as Kelly said, you will have opportunities to revise this budget. We only approve 1 year at a time. We want to see your full three years, but we will only approve 1 year at a time, because we know everything's going to change and we want you to have the funding to be adaptive. When you have a new student population coming in, you've got to figure out what that takes and what they need and all of that. And oftentimes that comes with resources you can't even predict. And so the other thing I would point out in what is allowable, when you are doing budget revisions, you actually can do the allowable, you can do budget revisions at the time you're doing it. So sometimes you're not going to predict what you need. And then you go back and you look at your budget and you're like, wow, we had to buy this whole, we had to buy all of this something or this support, or we had to do this. You have that ability to be flexible then too. So even after your first year is done, it doesn't, or is approved, it doesn't mean you can't change it for things that actually happened prior to that. Does that make sense? Or anybody have questions on that, I guess?
That makes sense. Yes. One more question though. The planning year you said, does it have to be taken? I mean, why would I need a planning year for?
I'm sorry, what would you need the what for?
A planning year. Why would I need to take a planning year? What's the purpose?
Oh, yeah, great question. The planning year is if you were going to start your expansion next school year. So the planning year, let's see, you ask good questions. That leads to other things. What are other people using it for? Using it for transportation. That is probably the biggest benefit of a planning year. There's two pieces. So the planning year that allows you to, so let's say you were starting your expansion in 2022. So you have this full planning year. In that planning year, you could purchase your transportation. That's when you can do more of your facilities updates. You could hire your staff in for PD or acclimation, whatever you needed for that. I mean, you could even literally bring them in January for the teachers who were going to teach your sixth grade the following fall. Bring them in early and pay them through this grant so that they start getting acclimated to your culture and they start to know the students, so that as the students move forward, they know them too. So that's the benefits of the planning, is just you get a lot more flexibility. If you were expanding though, and you wanted to recover, if you were doing a 5th, 6th, 7th, or well, let's say a 6th, 7th, 8th, but 6th started this year, you would not have planning. So the only difference is that is going to take away the opportunity for transportation and facility upgrades.
Could it be partial, like not full year? Let's say my expansion will start kicking in next September, right? So if I'm approved, then this grant period starts in November 1st. Maybe it could be November 1st till August 31st. Could be a planning time.
That's exactly what it would be. Yep. So if you were going to start, well, okay, wait a minute. I want to make sure. So you can't split your grades. So if you are in planning and you're starting your grade expansion that you want to include in this grant, I put that caveat on there because you might say, I already planned for 6th grade, but I want to use this for 7th and 8th grade. So you would end up going in a planning year from November 1st to October 31st, but only for 7th and 8th grade. So the difference would be if you chose to use the grade that started this year, but you can't do one grade in implementation and one grade in planning. So
Okay.
often what we'll do is we'll work with, we've done this actually for several schools this year. We've kind of said, okay, well, what is it that you need in planning? Because again, the only limitations in planning is that bus and facility upgrades. So if you don't need those two pieces, then there's not a huge advantage to doing that. And so what we've worked with schools is to say, how many expenditures would you have if you put your 5th grade eligible expenditures after November 1st, right? That's the consideration. You've already done a lot of that. That's going to be before the November 1st date. But if you said November 1st and on, what are all the expenditures that I have for this grade in this year? And then compare it to what the benefit is you'd get with planning. And we will work with you to figure out what works best. We're not going to define that for you. We will work with you to define what makes the most sense for your school.
Okay. And November 1st is the earliest date that we can ask for reimbursement.
Correct. Yes, that is part of DOE rules. We can do a look back, but it has to be after the application is submitted.
Right.
So
November 1st this year, correct?
correct. Yes.
All right.
Good clarification.
All right. Thank you.
You have other questions? Anything that's rolling around in your head?
So I just wanted to thank Olivia for being my my chat partner over the last few minutes. A little bit of a newbie at this, but I just want to make sure I understand something. I'm a potential partner for an organization that is hoping to replicate a model that has one school, and I would like to replicate the model. So is it correct to say that if the first step in this, if they haven't already applied to state ed, if they haven't already applied to replicate or expand, it is still possible to submit the letter of intent, the ASAP. And if that is approved, and if there was still time, obviously, we could then plan to submit a full application, or this timing is just not going to work out.
I can answer this one. Marilyn, I think it might be easier for you and I to connect offline because I think you're in a little bit of a different situation than the rest of the folks on the phone. So
Okay.
it's really a two-step process. The letter of intent is just for the grant. The letter of intent is not to ask for an approval of a replication or expansion. That needs to happen with the DOE. That's not something we oversee. We are the charter association that is distributing this grant. So you have to have submitted, I don't know if your school would be up for renewal, so that could be a part of their renewal application that's due October 15th. Or I don't know if it's an amendment request that's due, that would have to be submitted by the date that this application is due. But I think if you were, maybe you and I can connect offline and you can share a little bit more context about your situation, and I can happily provide you with some more guidance.
Great, thank you.
The other thing I would add, just as you're thinking about it, so we talked a lot about sustainability and of items, and that's important, but things that are testing, so things like you pay subscriptions for every year, you pay for, maybe you use NWEA map testing, you use whatever you use, those are all eligible pieces too. So that is another big chunk. A power school expansion. These are things that they're like $10,000 here, $10,000 there, but they start to add up. So those are always the things to think about too, is some things you can have. So if you do have a curriculum, for example, that you're using and you have workbooks or an online subscription for that, that's just an annual, as long as you're in your grants, you can carry that subscription past. And so some of our reasonableness when we kind of look at that is we understand that part of a healthy model is building up a reserve fund too. And so while personnel is hard to do that because that's so critical, we know that you're going to continue with your curriculum. We know that curriculum is a circular thing that you invest in every single year, and it's going to be, enhanced. So that's another good way as you're thinking about that. Also think about, like replacement equipment and computers, and think about some of that longevity. As Kelly had mentioned, how do you best position yourself 3 years from now when you're done? And so a lot of schools will put that equipment in and just have that rotation of equipment for their new students too, so that they're getting more, or just knowing that there's going to be breakage, there's going to be lost things. That's a great way to do it as well. And again, if you have 6 new teachers coming in, and they're covering 6 new classrooms, or just 6 new teachers coming in, I guess in general, that equates to 6 new smart boards, 6 new everything, 6 new whatever. So it's really the number of teachers that you're bringing in and the number of students that you're bringing in that allows us to expand this to the greatest level. All right, well, Kelly, you want to wrap us up?
Well, we just really appreciate your time today. It's such a pleasure working with the New Jersey Public Charter Schools Association and Olivia, and we're here to partner with you. Please, reach out to us through the CSP email there, and we are happy to support you. Wish you all the luck in the world as you're applying for the grant, and hope you have a great afternoon.
Thanks very much.
Don't hesitate to reach out with questions, csp@njcharters.org.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.